Hello, noble friends. Welcome to Premier Ta Philosophy. I'm Dr. Peter Yong, and today I'd like to criticize the psychologization of value in our culture perpetrated by the self-help and therapeutic industries. The concept of value has become central in contemporary therapeutic discourse. Many therapeutic interventions rely on the concept of value to prod people to behave in ways society deems healthy. For example, positive psychology notes that values are a vital part of self-actualization. For a person to live a self-actualized life, their course of life must be based upon their values. Or again, values are central in cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT for short. CBT notes that our cognitions, emotions, and actions are all interdependent, with actions influencing thoughts and feelings, feelings influencing actions and thoughts influencing feelings and actions. Values play a central role in all of this, since they constitute the standards by which our thoughts, feelings, and actions are evaluated. Likewise, values are primary in acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT for short. ACT teaches us to accept our thoughts and feelings, even the unpleasant ones, and to commit to a valued course of action. Again, values are the crucial factor. They, not our fleeting thoughts or feelings, define the quality of our character. This high valuation of value strikes me as plausible. Yet, when these psychologists attempt to explain what values are and why they should be valued, their account quickly disintegrates. For example, Seligman, the frontman for positive psychology, who previously established his psychological career by torturing dogs, evinces his confusion when he asserts that, quote, "Ethics are the rules you apply to get what you care about. What you care about, your values, is more basic than ethics. There is no philosophical discipline concerned with what we care about, and there is just the same gap in psychology." End quote. Here, Seligman fundamentally misconstrues the discipline of ethics and commits an overt is-ought fallacy. For, if, as Seligman claims, ethics are the rules you apply to get what you care about, then ethics would concern only conditional imperatives. If you want A, then do B. If you want X, then do Y, etc. But it would say nothing about whether we should want A or X. So, if someone wanted to torture puppies out of curiosity, ethics, on Seligman's construal, would be the rules one follows to most effectively torture them. In contrast to Seligman's faulty account, ethics is the discipline that examines what we should care about and do. For example, one should act with compassion towards other sentient beings, not torturing them just for fun. Other psychologists do not fare much better in accounting for values. One popular tool used in CBT, for example, the Valued Living Questionnaire, similar to the Wheel of Life forms used by life coaches, simply stipulates 10 categories and asks the client to respond on a 1 to 10 scale how much they value that category. For example, you would be asked how much you value family, intimate relationships, children, friendships, career, education, fun, spirituality, citizenship, and health. After identifying high-value items, one then goes on to ask the client how much of their time, energy, and resources they are devoting to that value, again, on a 1 to 10 scale. While such exercises may help clients get unstuck in life, they do not even attempt to provide an account of what values are and why they are, in fact, valuable. Indeed, some proponents of ACT deny that such an account is even possible. According to them, values are arbitrarily adopted. They are no more amenable to evaluation in terms of rightness or wrongness than are flavors of ice cream. Russ Harris, for example, asserts, quote, "Although many of us have similar values, no two people are exactly the same, and this is not some test to see if you have the right ones. There is no right or wrong, no good or bad when it comes to values. What you value is what you value, full stop. There's no need to justify or defend your values any more than there is a need to justify or defend your favorite flavor of ice cream. My favorite ice cream is maple walnut. Why? I don't know. My taste buds just prefer it. Do I have to justify it? If someone else prefers vanilla, does that mean that their taste buds are right and mine are wrong? Obviously not. And it's exactly the same with values. Someone else may have different values from yours, but that doesn't mean that theirs are better or worse. It just means they value different things." End quote. Just as the choice between vanilla and walnut ice cream comes down to a matter of preference, so too does the question of value. So, using a list provided by Harris, one person might value freedom, quote, "to live freely, to choose how I live and behave, or help others do likewise," end quote, while another might value conformity, quote, "to be respectful and obedient of rules and obligations," end quote. One might value spirituality, quote, "to connect with things bigger than myself," end quote, and justice, quote, "to uphold justice and fairness," end quote, while another might value pleasure, quote, "to create and give pleasure to myself or others," end quote, or power, quote, "to strongly influence or wield authority over others," end quote. This is all a matter of subjective preference. There is no right or wrong answer in this regard. Harris even gives the reader space to insert his or her own unlisted values. Literally, anything goes. Because values are equated with arbitrary preferences, psychologists acknowledge that values can contradict each other, and that their relative priority can change with time. Someone who values power above all else may act in ways inconsistent with justice. And the person committed to a life of pleasure may undertake actions that conflict with a life of spirituality. And as we move through life, our valuation of values will likely change with us. Harris observes, quote, "The relative importance we place on our values usually changes enormously throughout our lives. This means that if you return to the exercise above in a year's time, you may find that some of the values you marked as not important have shifted to quite important or very important, and vice versa." End quote. Values in ACT are not rules we should follow. Instead, they are particular desires at a given moment, desires that will likely change and conflict with other desires. As a result, they should be, quote, "held lightly but pursued vigorously," end quote. This therapeutic account of values is untenable in multiple ways. The theory that values are merely arbitrarily chosen, and the rank ordering can change with the circumstances of a person's life, leads to several problems. Consider an exemplar of a human life well lived. For example, let's consider the Buddha. According to legend, the Buddha was born into a noble family, but left his life of luxury to take up an ascetic life, hoping to discover the truth. He struggled for many years under various teachers, until he finally reached enlightenment, meditating under the Bodhi tree, and then spent the rest of his life teaching this path of enlightenment. We admire people like the Buddha. We have a sense that somehow his was a life well lived and worthy of emulation. We sense that he instantiated a noble potentiality deep in human nature that would not have been manifested had he given up on his quest or taken another course of life. In the terms used by Hayes, we could say that he was committed to the values of spirituality and mindfulness throughout his life. Now, let's consider someone else. Let's call him Sid. Sid is committed to the values that Hayes labels fun, quote, "to seek, create, and engage in fun-filled activities and pleasure," end quote, and pleasure, quote, "to create and give pleasure to myself or others," end quote. Sid, like the Buddha, is born into fortunate circumstances. But instead of leaving to seek enlightenment, he uses those resources to amass amusements for himself. He spends his time throwing lavish parties and playing video games. Note that, on the theory of value proposed by the therapeutic industry, the lives of Sid and the Buddha are equally admirable. The Buddha enjoys enlightenment, just like some people enjoy vanilla ice cream, and Sid enjoys cocaine and escorts, just like some people enjoy walnut ice cream. There is no sense in which one can say that the life of the Buddha is better than the life of Sid, and that the values of the former are more admirable than those of the latter. This is an absurd result. If this nihilistic vision is what therapeutic psychology has to offer us, then I wonder whether it might inculcate, rather than cure, depression and anxiety. Consider again the Buddha. Now, instead of contrasting him with another individual, imagine a scenario in which he gives up on his quest for enlightenment, goes back to his palace, and lives a life devoted to pleasure. This scenario makes sense to us. It is possible to begin a quest and then give up. Failure is possible. But, on the psychological view sketched above, such failure becomes inconceivable. For, rather than abandoning his calling to enlightenment, our failed Buddha can be described as having merely decided that the value of pleasure is more important to him at this time. He has not failed in his quest, but has rather succeeded in a different one. And, again, the choice between these values is arbitrary. There is no sense in which the person who sticks to the path of enlightenment and perseverance has chosen a better course of action than the person who decides to abandon that path for a life of pleasure. Again, the situation is supposed to be akin to choosing between ice cream flavors and pizza toppings. And, again, I find this claim to be absurd. And things get even worse. Imagine someone committed to the values of pleasure and power. Suppose that this person derives great pleasure in torturing other creatures. He, for example, likes torturing puppies. And he enjoys conquering other lands, enslaving their populations, and torturing them too. He lives a life fully committed to these values of pleasure and power. According to the therapeutic view, we ought to maintain that this sadistic tyrant's life is just as worthy of admiration as that of the Buddha. Just as we can't say that vanilla is an objectively better flavor of ice cream than walnut, so we also can't say that the life of the Buddha is objectively better than that of the tyrannical sadist. Furthermore, this position operates on the assumption that human desire functions in a vacuum. The idea is that I'm acting according to my values when they are the ones I desire. But we live in a society where marketing, propaganda, and other influence tactics, such as those used by cults, can manipulate our desires. Rather than securing autonomy, likening value choice to that of a flavor of ice cream actually undermines it and allows external interests to shape the direction of our lives. I sometimes wonder whether these factors might be playing a bigger role in the psychological and therapeutic industry than most people would like to admit. The contemporary psychological and therapeutic approach to personal growth thus fails spectacularly in attempting to account for value, a concept they themselves admit is central to human happiness. I suspect that this failure flows from their inadequate accounts of reason. Psychologists tend to view the mind as something that evolved in order to solve problems. The mind, on this account, is what allows us to design weapons, dig wells, and construct shelters. Stephen Hayes, the originator of ACT, for example, explains that, quote, "The human mind is a problem-solving organ. It detects dangers, analyzes situations, predicts outcomes, and suggests actions. In the world outside our skins, that works wonderfully well. But when those same logical abilities are turned within, a human life becomes a problem to be solved rather than a process to be experienced. A trap opens up. Life gets put on hold while we fight a war within. There is a simple reason for this. The world within is not logical, it's psychological." End quote. Simply put, what is special about the human mind is that it allows us to make guns, while other animals can't. As a result, when we turn this problem-solving tool to the internal world, it can no longer adequately solve the problems that confront it, since inner problems differ significantly from problems in the external environment. For example, if something is frightening in the outer world, we could either run away from it or fight it. But this strategy does not serve us well when we are frightened by our own feelings. When we try to fight them or run from them, they only grow more frightening. Yet, this problem-solving conception of mind proves to be extremely impoverished when compared with traditional philosophical accounts. For example, while Plato would admit that the mind can solve problems, its chief concern was to contemplate the form of the good, from which the rest of reality emanated. Similarly, Aristotle identifies eudaimonia with a life of contemplation, noting that, quote, "So, if among excellent actions, political and military actions are distinguished by nobility and greatness, and these are leisurely, and aim at an end, and are not desirable for their own sake, but the activity of intellect, which is contemplative, seems both to be superior in worth, and to aim at no end beyond itself, and to have its pleasure proper to itself, as this augments the activity, and the self-sufficiency, leisureliness, unweariedness, so far as this is possible for man, and all other attributes ascribed to the blessed man are evidently those connected with this activity. It follows that this will be the complete happiness of man, if it be allowed a complete term of life, for none of the attributes of happiness is incomplete." End quote. Likewise, for Kant, reason was the faculty that sought the unconditioned. And Hegel believed that through it we grasped the absolute, as it, in turn, grasped us in art, religion, and philosophy. They also believed that reason is what distinguished autonomous choices from haphazard desires, desires that are all too easily manipulated. If we have thought through our values for ourselves, relying on the dictates of our own reason, they come to be truly ours, defining our characters and lending us their strength. Philosophy, religion, and the humanities thus use a richer concept of mind and reason than those proposed by psychology and the therapeutic industry. As a result, their concepts of values and their rank ordering will also be different. It is this broader philosophical tradition, I believe, that may offer us a more truthful analysis of the human condition, both in its suffering and in the meaning that can be drawn from it. Contemporary therapists are right to point out that values are crucial to a meaningful life and bearing suffering with nobility. Only one weapon suffices. Yet their constricted view of mind prevents them from providing an adequate account of these values. To find such an account, we must look elsewhere, perhaps to those disciplines who, wandering in exile and in silence, have long been carrying the real remedy for our affliction.